Welcome, everyone, to the fourth webinar in the Language Access Continuing Education series. My name is Susan Clifford, and I work as the Language Access Coordinator at the UNC Institute for the Study of the Americas in Chapel Hill. We see language access as a practice that benefits all of our communities. Multilingual staffing and interpretation services are essential for community members who speak languages other than English to have meaningful access to services, inclusion in government agencies, and representative leadership. And when multilingual environments are supported, local governments, nonprofits, and other institutions are able to work with and learn from everyone in their community. So as we deepen our language access work, we recognize the need to explore current and historical forces affecting language, particularly languages such as Haitian Creole and indigenous languages from Latin America, like Quiche, which are increasingly spoken by immigrants living and working in North Carolina. All right, so Dr. Paul Meighan is a Gael sociolinguist, educator, and researcher who speaks English, French, Spanish, Italian, and Scottish Gaelic. He holds multiple degrees and certificates, including a PhD in educational studies, which he earned in 2023 at McGill University in Montreal, Quebec. Dr. Meighan's research introduced the term colonialingualism, defined as the privileging of dominant colonial languages. His work focuses on addressing colonial lingualism through educational practices that value and include knowledges from multiple languages, literacies, and cultures, and by reclaiming and preserving indigenous languages. Dr. Meighan currently serves as chair for the TESOL International Association's Bilingual Multilingual Education Interest Section. Welcome, Dr. Meighan.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you to everyone at the Language Access Coalition for this invitation. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much, everyone, for your hard work. I'll now share my screen. Can everyone see that? Great. So an overview of my talk today, I'll first introduce myself and give some more reasons for my research. I'll then introduce colonialingualism by giving a definition and some examples. I'll then give everyone some ideas and thoughts I have on how we can address colonialingualism in education and also in the workplace. I'll then wrap up with some concluding remarks. So, Ko Misha, who am I? Is me se Meighan Shiblo, sé géal a honum, rúg agus hócha mí an an glasachu, an an alapa, son used the jés a ha, hio mo hiolach, agus haré na uramgá, a bhí a brín raiv and you. My name is Paul Meighan Shiblo. I am a Scottish Gael sociolinguist. I was born and raised in Glasgow, Scotland. My family is from the Isle of South Uist, and it is an honor to be speaking with you all today. My research is motivated by the harms of colonization and imperialism on Indigenous languages and speaker communities worldwide. For my conceptualization of colonialingualism, I draw on my own experiences as a Gael brought up in Glasgow by a mother from South Uist. These experiences have influenced my work and research in colonialingualism and language education. Gaelic, an endangered Indigenous language in Scotland, was not available to me in the English medium educational system. I could hear Gaelic or Gaelic all the time around my fluent grandmother, who moved the family to Glasgow for work when my mother was a teenager, and my grandmother lived down the street from us. However, as I mentioned, Gaelic was not available to me in school. And when I asked my grandmother to teach me Gaelic, she said, no, you don't need it. You don't need Gaelic. I didn't understand why at the time, but now, as a new adult and heritage learner of Gaelic, I understand more. Gaelic and Gaelic culture were almost eradicated due to many factors, such as the forced eviction of the Gaels from their traditional lands and territories during the Highland clearances in the 18th and 19th centuries, and the near destruction of traditional Gaelic clan-based society after the Battle of Culloden in 1746 by British government and imperial forces. 1 year later, in 1747, one of the first uses of the word colonization in English appears in a text by Samuel Boyes, which spoke about the colonization of the newly depopulated parts of the Scottish Highlands, my traditional territories. In more present times, members of my own family recall being beaten for speaking Gaelic and being told to speak in English in classrooms. The multi-generational and psychological impacts of this oppression has led to the near destruction of family and community language transmission of Gaelic, as evidenced here by the declining numbers of Scottish Gaelic speakers. Since meeting and marrying my Anishinaabe Ojibwe husband in Glasgow, Scotland in 2016, and after immigrating to what is also known as Canada with him, I have learned more from my Anishinaabe family about the devastating and ongoing harms of colonization on Indigenous languages and peoples of these lands. All of these experiences have driven me to think of ways in which we can enact more equitable language education and policy, and to think about my work on addressing colonial lingualism. Today, I'm speaking to you from Toronto, and I would like to say miigwech, tapalev, thank you to the lands, waters, animals, plants, spirits, and Indigenous peoples who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. Language and education have been weaponized as colonizing tools. Multilingualism was common before colonial and imperial expansion. Indigenous and minoritized languages and communities worldwide have been subjected to genocide and destructive policies and legislation. Studies estimate one language is lost every 1 to 3 months. However, language loss is not natural, nor is it unavoidable. Quoting Stephen May here, language loss is not only, perhaps not even primarily, a linguistic issue. It has much more to do with power, prejudice, unequal competition, and in many cases, overt discrimination and subordination. Colonialingualism is the privileging of dominant colonial languages, knowledges, and neoliberal values of diversity in education and policy. Systemic, structural, and institutional change is urgently needed to address ongoing tools of colonization, such as colonialingualism. Some examples of colonialingualism in everyday mainstream education include monolingual and monocultural learning environments, such as English-only classrooms with white native speaker materials that exclude the peoples and knowledges of local speaker communities and their lands. Decontextualized, disembodied, language as resource, language as code tasks, such as comprehension activities without any acknowledgement of culture or history. Privileging the Western print canon and quote unquote standard forms of language, such as an idealized upper middle class homogeneous language. Deprivileging land-based or community-based education, community language definitions, and visual oral literacies, such as pictographs, body art, standing stones, and dreams as interpretation or acquisition of knowledge. And finally, physical, mental punishment and violence for speaking a heritage, minoritized, or indigenous language. I propose that we can address colonialingualism by including knowledge bridging approaches to education and policy. I have named this approach trans-epistemic language education. Trans-epistemic language education is a way of learning, teaching, knowing, and being, which enables respectful, and non-hierarchical knowledge co-creation while we engage with languages, peoples, cultures, and lands. Some thoughts and suggestions I have for addressing colonial lingualism in education include, but are not limited to, using the example of English as a second language classroom for adults. I propose we draw on our collective heritage knowledges, languages, and cultures. When we did this in our English as a second language classroom, one student, for example, from Turkey, shared that they have whistled languages there. And another student from Mexico shared how chocolato is the original hot chocolate drink and originated in Mayan culture. This classroom was in Toronto, Ontario. In our classroom, we also learned from local Indigenous languages, as I mentioned, such as Toronto, which can be translated as where there are trees standing in the water. All of these activities stimulated the students and engaged them more in the discussion and in the learning process. We also learned from Indigenous concepts, such as water is life. Some suggestions for addressing colonialingualism in the workplace include multilingual policies to promote visibility of local Indigenous languages alongside dominant languages in the workplace, language and cultural awareness training about the impacts of colonialingualism, supporting local Indigenous recruitment and community outreach, and supporting Indigenous language learning and also heritage language learning more broadly to foster respect for alternative ways of knowing and seeing the world. So in conclusion, colonialingualism is a privileging of dominant colonial languages, knowledges, and neoliberal valorizations of diversity in education and policy. Knowledge bridging approaches and Indigenous and minoritized language awareness in education and the workplace can help address colonialingualism. Now, I would love to open it up to the fellow panelists and pose the broader question of how do you think we can address colonialingualism in education and the workplace? Miigwech, Tapalev, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you again for your patience.